I think that we have to find what we need to move us forward, and maybe for some people that requires a certain amount of suffering to get through some difficult obstacles, but for other people it might not.
Mm.
I don't think that there's any magic to suffering itself. The magic comes in how we receive and integrate everything that happens to us.
I'm so excited to introduce you to Karen Harris. Some of you Heart Mind fans know her, some of you don't, but she is a divinity mentor, a community leader, and she's really a pioneer in my eyes as a teacher. She holds a Master's of Divinity degree in spiritual leadership from Harvard University. But before that, she was deeply informed for decades with her practice and her travels through India, Nepal, Japan, Tibet. She immersed herself in this environment as much as she could, and she found her gurus, her teachers, her mentors. Her international work has also included guiding global adventures and study programs to different places around the world. She is a leader in yoga. She's taught at the university level. She taught at the same university that my husband teaches at now, which was called Humboldt University back then, and now it's called Cal Poly in Humboldt. And she also served as the minister at the spiritual community in which we now go to at the HUF, Humboldt Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. It's with great honor that she has allowed me to interview her journey and to share with you her insights. I just want to jump in, if that's okay with you, and hear about, we're today going to talk about spiritual maturity, but I want to hear about your pathway from going from, well, I don't actually know exactly where you started. Did you start traveling in your spiritual path and then ended up in school for ministry and divinity?
Well, I wanted to go to divinity school from the time I was an undergraduate, but I didn't have any source of funding. And so I had to really postpone that until I was pretty well along in my working life. I didn't actually start my divinity school training until I was 44, 45. I had to make the money to pay for the degree first. So, I was in deep spiritual exploration before I went to divinity school. By the time I left, I had to go to divinity school. I had lived in a Zen monastery for 2 years, and I had studied with an Indian Hindu guru for about 15 years.
Wow.
15 years. By the time I went to divinity school, I was a single mom. I had to support my family. So my spiritual journey had to wait a long time while I supported my family and gathered the resources to go to divinity school.
And were you taking your family along with you on your travels?
Sometimes, sometimes I was prevented by the family court from taking my kids with me. And sometimes I was able to take them with me. But I did travel to India and Japan several times. I was only able to take my daughter on those trips, but not my son, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I did a lot of spiritual search and spiritual practice while being ordered by the court to remain within 30 miles of my abusive ex. So it was definitely a very challenging situation, but it really only served to deepen my determination to do my spiritual practice.
Yeah, well, that was actually, we're kind of jumping right in. One of my questions around spiritual maturity, which is our topic, is that how you feel this like suffering or trials supports that endeavor of maturing spiritually.
I think that we have to find what we need to move us forward. And maybe for some people that requires a certain amount of suffering to get through some difficult obstacles. But for other people, it might not.
Mm,
I don't think that there's any magic to suffering itself. The magic comes in how we receive and integrate everything that happens to us. For some of us, it's good fortune that takes us down in very difficult ways, right?
mm,
Maybe win the lottery and make some really bad choices.
yeah,
Good fortune and bad fortune can come, and we can make mistakes or we can make progress with either. It depends on how we receive it and what we do with it. That's my.
right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it makes me think like suffering and fortune are separate things.
Hmm. Yeah, good. I mean, how can you tell what's good fortune? There are a lot of actually spiritual stories about that, especially in the older traditions like Buddhism and Hinduism that go way, 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 way back, before Christianity. A lot of the early tales show things happening that seem like good fortune, but then as it unfolds then in the story, it becomes quite clear that there's a story about a man who breaks his leg, and it seems like it's bad fortune, but then a war starts and he doesn't have to go to war, and that seems like good fortune. And
Yeah,
he goes on from there, like
I know.
setting the norms about what seems fortunate and unfortunate. And in the spiritual path, anything that we claim for ourselves that we say is mine, um, that's a problem in the spiritual world. It's more about how we treat others and what we offer to others than what we claim and keep for ourselves. And that's true across spiritual traditions. So it's really how we receive and what we do with the things that happen to us um, that become either our spiritual maturity or our descent in another direction.
Mm.
Sorry,
Can you remember
keep the. There we go. That's better.
the light? Yeah, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. We want to be able to see you. Um, do you remember what like drew you to that first travel and going east with your travels?
Yeah, I think the first major trip that I made probably was to India. I started going to Japan after that, but I met my spiritual teacher, and was just it was after the Zen monastery. I'd lived there for 2 years, and I realized that that practice was really incompatible with being a single mother. I had not yet made the connection that the reason for that was because the Buddhist origin story, you leave behind the wife and the children. The Buddha
Mm.
was I'm sorry to say this, it's a beautiful tradition. It's got the most amazing teachers, but the Buddha was a deadbeat dad.
Mm.
And spiritual practice in the Buddhist world is set up to all the practice is done by the spiritual adepts, the monks, and
Yeah.
the lay people is to support the monks. And nuns in Tibet aren't even fully ordained. They mostly do physical labor. So it's a very, very different view of who does spiritual practice and how that gets empowered. And so as time went on and I studied the world religions, and I studied them on my own, and I went to divinity school and learned more and more. And I began to realize that in Buddhism, that bifurcated reality, the reality for the monks and then the reality for all the lay people, that's cooked in to Buddhist culture from the very beginning. And it's not until you get to 20th century Western practice that you see lay people trying to be the ones who are the practitioners. And not take the vows and not leave behind life in the world, but still be spiritual heroes and do the spiritual practice. That's a very Western adaptation of Buddhism. So that feeling that I had of it being incompatible with being a single mother was, really right on the money when I
Mm.
studied more deeply. And I found a Hindu guru who was a woman, and that she had many, many, many families following her. And in her spiritual organization, the retreats and the programs and the teaching, it was for all ages. And children had their own spiritual instruction, and they also could come to a lot of the programming with their parents. It was very family friendly and family oriented. And so I spent a number of years diving very, very deeply into that tradition, which, has its own uh, challenges and things that make it easier and harder to do.
Mm.
But in terms of finding a practice as a single mother with a young family, it was a real lifesaver for me. So
Yeah.
that was a huge transition for me. And then out of that, I was ultimately able to, and a lot of hard work in the financial realm as supporting my kids. I was finally able to do the academic degree and do the study.
I see. I've never heard, and I'm just, feels like a breath of fresh air. I've never heard someone call the Buddha a deadbeat dad, but it does feel like a real, I don't know, awakening for like that permission to see him in that way as well. And I started out with Buddhism as well, more Tibetan Buddhist traditions. My aunt introduced me to that, and at a young age would participate in that tradition and meditation, walking meditation. But I always found it pretty um, mental. It was like a lot of mental engagement, but it didn't serve uh, going out into my body and more of, those, like you're saying, household endeavors as much. I mean, it did support it some, but it just seemed really intellectual, I guess is what I'm
I
saying.
have a deep, deep respect for and connection with Buddhism and its teachings. And I'm absolutely certain that the Buddha's wife and children were taken care of.
Mm.
A wealthy family. And I'm sure in that culture, fathers played an absolutely almost non-existent role in the
Right.
raising of their children. It's when I say deadbeat dad, I don't mean at all that his children were not cared for. I mean, who knows? It's a long, long time ago, but I'm
Right.
quite sure that they were. So it's not the same as a contemporary abandonment of family where women are left on their own to provide themselves in a culture that is dead set against them doing that successfully.
Well, he's also very wealthy, right? Like you're saying, he's very wealthy, according to the story. So, which happens in more modern times too.
Yeah.
Abandonment.
And the teachings are amazing. There's as I studied religion more and more throughout this, 71 years of life, I always come back to the beauty and the power of the Buddhist teachings and what they have to offer us. And the culture, in order to really adapt to where we're at in the 21st century, in terms of our understanding of men's and women's roles in culture, we really have to make a lot of changes. And the culture, say in Zen and Tibetan Buddhism, of a real spiritual practitioner completely withdraws from the world and goes on retreat and leaves behind all of the things that so occupy our time and attention in 21st century reality.
Mm.
There are consequences to that ethically. So, yeah, I think it bears a lot of thought and attention to bring these traditions into our culture in a way that really honors them and what they have to offer, but also honors our contemporary commitments to equality,
Mm.
um, to opening the world to women who have been denied so much all around the world in every spiritual culture.
Right.
And it's not just Tibetan Buddhism.
No, no, or Buddhism or, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
can I ask you with Harvard, so you eventually around 45 were able to take the time and the financial resources to invest in yourself and in your education, and you got a master's of divinity at Harvard. How did that experience help or create that path of spiritual maturity for you?
It was an amazing experience. For me, that 5 years at Harvard was very much a part of my spiritual path. I used to have this phrase I called both eyes open. And often, of course, we think of religious tradition as being faith-based. And we actually imagine that people walk with faith, right? Believing things that are physically impossible. Uh, and we call that faith, a belief in something that we know is physically impossible. And for me, the eye of faith is actually not knowing. There's a lot about the world we don't know. We've learned a lot about physical reality because we've fine-tuned our instrumentation to study physical reality, but there's a lot we don't know. And faith is about what we don't know, not what we believe, right? What we believe is saying, I know, even though we can't. And faith is, I trust in God, even though I don't know. So for me, that experience of being in the divinity school was keeping the eye of faith wide open, but also keeping the eye of rational and observation, and particularly of my own experience. So what I did was I worked with teachers who inspired me, teachers that could help me deeply investigate things like patriarchy in religion. I studied with a woman named Carol Gilligan, who did deep studies of patriarchy in our culture, and learned techniques from her to study particularly the Hebrew Bible, or what Christianity often calls the Old Testament, to get some understanding of what patriarchy means and how it became so firmly entrenched in our culture and in our understanding. And I studied with a man named Jeffrey Kripal, who studied mysticism and Hinduism, to help me understand deep meditation experiences that I had while I was in spiritual practice with my guru. And to look at those experiences through many different lenses, including the lens of what role the tendency to dissociate might play. Because as an adult survivor of sexual abuse, there's a tendency often, especially if the abuse happened when you're very young, to learn how to dissociate from physical reality. And of course, that opens the door, as many people studying these phenomena have found, to an increased ability to have mystical experience. So it was, and that's an example of keeping the eye of faith open, that this experience happened, that it is in some sense real, and it has meaning, and it's worth contemplating and investigating, but also keeping this other eye of what we know about psychology, what we know about human development, the realities, the ubiquity of the sexual exploitation of women and young girls, keeping all of our eyes open as we look at all of these phenomena. So that 5 years at Harvard, for me, was very, very difficult, keeping both of those eyes open, not explaining away everything through faith, but also not denying other realities we can't understand other than the purely physical. Super, super powerful experience. And in the end, I wrote a thesis that combined a deep appreciation for my teachers and the worldviews that they taught me, the spiritual texts that they illuminated for me, but side by side with that, stories from my own spiritual path, my stories of sexual abuse, my stories of mystical experiences, my stories of working with these different teachers and these different traditions, the cultural differences between them, everything that opened up in me from living in a Zen monastery with my very young children. It was really an extraordinary experience. And I got to really look at all of that experience and share it with my professors through writing my master's thesis.
I would like to read that.
I'd be happy to share it with you. I'd sort of be too.
As you know, and a lot of people on this podcast know that the audience listens because I like to speak to those people. Like, this is one of the topics that I'm really passionate about, is supporting and bringing into the light more around sexual abuse. So I really appreciate you doing that, and I want to read it for sure.
I'd be happy to share it with you, Holly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just sticking to your path, like one more step or two, maybe. Did you end up in Cal Poly pretty quickly after the Divinity School?
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. Yeah, it was kind of immediate. In the spring of 2004, my mom passed away, and she was kind of the last thing tethering me to the East Coast. She passed away as I was writing my final papers for my last semester at Harvard. And actually, I ended up writing a paper about that. My first sermon, the first time I ever stepped into the pulpit of a church, was to conduct the service for my mother's funeral a couple of weeks before I graduated from Harvard. So, and then I graduated in June, and we spent the summer emptying out my mother's house, and then drove back to California. Steve was going to be teaching at what used to be Humboldt State in August. And 2 weeks before the semester started, we learned that the woman who was going to teach the Hinduism survey class that fall had left Humboldt. And there was to teach that class.
Wow, serendipity.
It was total serendipity. And so then I ended up teaching until 2016. And ended up I taught a number of different things, but from the very beginning, I asked to please be able to teach a history of yoga class that would use the history of yoga to actually teach all the major philosophical traditions of India by showing how they defined yoga. And it took me a while to get permission to teach that class, but when I finally did, that's pretty much all I taught after that.
Yeah, I bet it was popular.
Oh my gosh. Seats were always full.
Yeah. I'm surprised the universities, to be honest, haven't yet, like, they will, but really taken yoga and profited off of it yet.
There are some universities, and I've populated them with my students. I've got a student who did a master's down in LA at, I was skipping my mind, the name of the school, and then Harvard now has a yogic studies program, and I have a student who did his PhD there, and yeah, there are ways.
Yeah, it's inevitable, I think. So tell me because you inspired this topic, and have been talking about this topic, I think, or maybe mulling it over with yourself and grappling with it. So tell me what draws you to it and what excites you about it.
It's been something I've been thinking about a lot for a number of different reasons. There are a couple of traditions that I am tracking really closely and that have, had some real deep challenges. And the ability to respond to those challenges is greatly enhanced when there's some good, solid spiritual maturity. And the tendency to respond to challenges in ways that don't at all express the fundamental teachings of the spiritual path is really high when there's no spiritual maturity. So that's one reason I've been consulting with some spiritual groups and let's just, for lack of a better word, say congregations, even though some of them are in realms where that word wouldn't be used. That and I've been consulting and seeing that really what needs, it's kind of like the preventive vaccine would be some real contemplation around spiritual maturity. But the truth is, this is everywhere in our culture right now.
Hmm.
When we think just in a way about there's a in the recent years, there's this phrase, everything, what is it? Everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Something like that. I can't remember the exact phrase, but the idea being that what we're taught when we enter kindergarten about how to be with our fellow classmates and how to be with ourselves, very fundamental stuff that we somehow leave behind and enter into the world of capitalist, bottom line orientation. That all gets left behind, but it's all there. That idea of fairness and kindness and mutual respect, it's very absent in our public life. And we recognize in, say, the grocery store, when a 2-year-old has a tantrum because they don't get their way and stomps and screams and yells and wants to hurt other people, we recognize that as immaturity. And we recognize that that child needs to be held and guided and learn, hopefully by kindergarten, how to draw down within themselves to meet challenges in a more graceful way, in a way that doesn't harm oneself and especially doesn't harm others. We no longer recognize that on the public stage. We no longer recognize arrogant, egotistical, self-oriented, self-aggrandizement, harm to others. We no longer recognize that as immaturity of any kind. But the spiritual traditions of the world are very clear. They differ in all kinds of ways. Their texts, the clothing, the language, many, many ways in which they differ. But the spiritual traditions of the world are, maybe there's some that don't hold this, but I have yet to find them. There's an orientation towards the benefiting of others. There's doing no harm to others. There's kindness. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you look at all of the world's major traditions, these kinds of teachings are fundamental to expressing what it is you're shooting for. Sainthood is not selfishness in any tradition. Sainthood is benefiting others. Sainthood is a much, as a matter of fact, my favorite tradition in this regard is Buddhism, because it's very clear what you're aiming for. In Buddhism, it actually explicitly says in the older texts, the traditional texts, that it is the mother that is the emblem of spiritual maturity. Mother who cares for her child, who loves her child no matter what, nurtures her child before herself. This is the epitome of spiritual maturity in Buddhism. After our culture has wandered very, very far. Motherhood is not valued, is not supported, and is often denigrated. In many ways, that's institutionalized in our culture, no matter what you see about trad wives on Instagram.
Yeah.
Mothers are not treated well.
It reminds me of a text from my lineage, Deskachar, and healing and beyond, or something like this. And mainly it's Krishnamacharya's words, but Deskachar put them together. And one of the few things that he said, because there's not a lot where we have direct words from him, but Krishnamacharya was saying, if you want to know yoga, be or see a mother nursing her baby. you know?
So, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And maybe that's in early Hinduism as well. I don't know. It may be somewhere in the Vedic texts, but for sure it's in the early Buddhist texts. My ex-husband was a scholar of Buddhism and um, has done all the research to confirm that.
Yeah. But I think that's that kind of deeper meaning of what you're talking about, connection, service, um, continuing to nurture life, right? Like to grow and to continue in union.
Yeah, the Christian minister, is the shepherd who tends the flock. And spiritual leadership in many traditions, right? It's the care, not just getting up and preaching on Sunday, but to really care for that group of people and to guide them in the paths of spiritual maturity. In other words, to support them and nurture them and help them to become more caring, kind, and compassionate people in their daily life.
So, what are the conversations like that you're having around this with different groups? What are you noticing? What are you seeing that's on people's minds and hearts when you're having these conversations?
Well, you have to understand that I've some of the work I've been doing this last 10 years is to walk with perpetrators. I think that it is one of the most important conversations that we can have right now, to look at our own life and be clear about how we are engaged with others and how we are expressing and embodying whatever teachings we hold to be the highest, and whether or not that way of holding our convictions and our beliefs is harming anyone, including ourselves. It's a very, very important question right now to kind of stop. And if I think about that, what I learned in kindergarten, that in a way, those are the rules that are getting violated in the public platform right now. Treating others with disrespect is rampant, right? And one of the things I've been working with a lot in myself, because I've always thought of myself as progressive. I've never registered as a Democrat. I've always been registered as an independent, but I think of myself as liberal or progressive, and I identify with a lot of those values. But what I've been doing lately is contemplating what of the conservative values do I value? I value family. I value a culture that will allow me to practice my spiritual tradition without interference, judgment, or denigration. I value that. And many of our conservative counterpoints, or our conservative brothers and sisters in this country, feel that they have not been given that by the larger culture, that the larger culture has actually been betraying their commitment to values of family and community. And that's not okay. I'm actually in the process of spending a lot more time in the very conservative rural town where I grew up. And I'm really enjoying the way that tiny little conservative, deep red community embodies its cultural values. Tonight I'm going to go serve at the local church supper at the church where I went when I was a very little girl. And I'm really trying to get in touch with the conservative values that I'm very committed to. And I'm deeply committed to loving and respecting all of my brothers and sisters, no matter how conservative or radical they might be. And to really looking at what do I value and why, and how can I deepen that to share more culture with the people next to me in this world right now, rather than trying to retreat into some kind of idea about being a liberal or progressive, to actually look at the people I'm living with, look at the people I'm working with, and find what of their values do I hold also, and how can I change my life so that I'm expressing those in ways that can be recognized by anyone.
Mm. Yeah, I am so, as always, Karen, inspired and um, full of admiration, really, of what you're doing. And I think most of us, or a lot of us in America, are very divided in our families. Like, I know that I have parts of my family that are very conservative, and there's a longing to connect and to um, have conversation and to be in service with each other. And yet, at times, it feels so divided, and like a wall is put there. And it's not just like in the greater sphere of the country. It feels like it's in families. My husband's the same. Like he has that same wall in parts of his family, and conservative versus progressive in his family. So it's I think that's one of the questions I did have for you in this time where we do feel really divided. How do we start to spiritually mature and mend?
Well, we have to get a little less stickily attached to our own purity of identity, right? I'm a good radical. No, actually, there are many things that are being done that are very divisive on both sides. Many of the accusations being leveled by one side are things they've faced from the other side and done themselves. So letting go of these identities, that leads to cult,
Yeah.
spiritual maturity. I am this, I think this, I believe this, and you are that, and you. No, that leads to division. And we really desperately need to curb that kind of thinking that values me and what I think and how I express over everyone else. That's not spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity is recognizing the human community and everyone in it as equally free, equally valid, equally sacred, equally to be respected. Now, how are we going to live together in a way that doesn't harm ourselves, each other? Ideally, we want to add the planet and all the other living beings in there, but let's start with us. We got to start.
Yeah. But that being said, like going back just to the general feeling of dividedness, you had mentioned it, like you're doing it on the ground for someone that might be not have as much of, still on maybe the beginning of their path spiritually and investigating spiritually, but wanting or longing maybe to start to engage. What are some small things that they could start to do to spiritually mature? Are there things either doing or seeking that they could start that process for themselves?
You know what really helped me a lot in my spiritual journey was having really good teachers, but also learning not to put them too much on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
But having really good teachers and then doing my best to be a good student of really paying attention to what about them and the way they are walking their path is helpful for me. And you can really learn a lot. With my Zen teacher, Daido Lori, I he had an absolutely immeasurable effect on my life. I'm so grateful that I met him and I was able to study with him. The same with Elie Wiesel. He was the first person the first lecture when I did my divinity degree. And he ended up becoming a very important mentor to me. And that had a deep impact on my understanding of forgiveness and how to walk with the people who've harmed me, how to walk with them, the people, but also how to walk with them as I carry them within me. That's actually really, right? That's where the rubber really hits the road. What's my relationship with my abusers within myself? Do I hold them as full human beings deserving of love and compassion? And what can I do? This is where my real growing edge is right now, especially with respect to sexual abuse. What can I do to make it more likely that that person will heal so that they will never need to be a sexual abuser again? Because that's actually something that we haven't really thought about. We only think about punishment. And usually punishment is a virtual guarantee that that person will abuse again and again, because the punishment itself can be abusive. And it's abuse that drives people to be abusive. So how do we work with perpetrators, largely men? How do we work with them in our relationship, inside and out, to move toward healing for everyone, but especially for them, so it doesn't happen again?
Some women are going to feel, or maybe again, this is part of that maturity. I hear you, and I feel like I'm on that path as well. And some women will feel like the burden of that care and that, again, almost like the holding and the uh, processing of helping a perpetrator spiritually mature is then put again on us.
Oh, well, no, that's not the job of the person who's been abused. But they can do a lot from their side that will actually increase their own likelihood of healing.
Right.
In terms of healing their relationship with their abuser. There's a lot of work that can be done from that side. And one of the most powerful things we can do is to support ourselves and others not going down the road of victimhood, where we give up our agency. Once we give up our agency, right? And of course, we were victims. I was sexually abused when I was 4 years old. There was absolutely nothing I could do about it. Much older than me. Nothing to be done. So we're helpless, right? But we are not helpless now.
Right.
We are not. And to continue to deny oneself agency by hiding behind the role of victim is not, after a certain point, going to lead to health and healing. It actually holds us back. And this is actually something that we really need to work on in our culture. And I
when you say,
I'm
sorry, when you say this, you mean the transformation of victim into agency?
Well, it begins with, what do we do when we learn there's been abuse? Do we focus on punishment? Or do we focus on healing for everyone involved? Right now, our focus is all on punishment. It's, did he do it? And what's the punishment? And the victims, there's really not any focus at all on them.
And or it didn't happen. That's starting to not be as common, but for a long time it was like, to the victims, like, that's gaslighting, like that didn't happen.
It used to be that, I mean, this is very broad and it's not obviously this
Yeah.
simple. It used to be that the woman was blamed,
Yeah.
right? And then the man goes free. And blame and shame and canceling was all projected onto the woman. Now it's the opposite. Blame and shame and canceling is all projected onto the man. Those are equally unfortunate from the point of view of healing.
In my experience, it was because it was still the 80s, and I know, like, yeah, you had a different experience in your generation as well. But my experience, because probably the blame and shame and the punishing would be on the woman adult in that household was so scared of that that it became just, it didn't happen, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I don't know because there was no, I didn't know when I was living at home. I only know because my abuser asked for my forgiveness as an adult. I didn't even know it had happened.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, I can't speak to that. I can't speak to what role the adult woman in the household played because we were all in the dark.
Right. That's what I'm trying to say. Is what I'm saying is for a long time, like no one was punished but the victim, really, because it was so in the dark.
Well,
Yeah.
no family suffers.
Yes. Yeah.
And you know that that abuser probably grew up to have all kinds of difficulties psychologically, inwardly, perhaps even legally, perhaps with addiction. Who knows?
Right. Yeah. It goes in lots of different ways.
Abusers
Uh,
often get deeply involved in various kinds of sexual addiction, very, very traumatic and difficult for them and for their families.
yeah. I didn't realize when you had brought this to me, this idea, how much it was embedded with this type of healing. And I'm really grateful that you're going into that kind of depth and what you're doing. I just want to say I see that service and I'm really grateful for it, Karen.
Thank you. It feels really important to me. And, there are a lot more tools available now, Holly. Some of them are coming from the part of the world that you're oriented to for your yoga work. They're out of the Maori people in New Zealand have really helped us understand and deepen this idea of restorative justice,
Hmm.
where instead of justice being focused on punishment, it's focused on restoration and healing for everyone involved, the perpetrator, the victim, and the surrounding community. Because the truth is, all of those different um, people get deeply harmed. There's a sexual abuse situation I was working on last year where the community was so deeply harmed. It's just phenomenal how harm can spread. And often the justice does even more harm,
Right.
separating children from their fathers is when they go to jail, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying people shouldn't go to jail. One of my adult abusers went to jail and it absolutely changed his life for the better. He's never been a perpetrator that I'm aware of since that jail term. But it's because he received something there from the women who came to counsel him that it was because he received basically restorative healing justice when he was in jail. So it can make an enormous difference. We have a lot of tools available to us now that we didn't in the 80s.
Right. Yeah, I was a part of a restorative justice team that would do, um, I was in theater in graduate school. So we would go and do devised theater with men that were on parole for domestic violence. And I ended up directing and putting on a play about them processing that through poetry and performative art. And it was really powerful for the community.
That is so beautiful. Yeah, for me, it was a real breakthrough when I was finally able to write about my abuse. It was very, very freeing to open the voice and speak it.
Yeah.
So we have to be really careful about how we do things like that, especially now in this time where so much is taken out of context,
Mm.
it's just publicly. So we have to
Right.
be very, very careful. But yeah, mhm.
Well, I'm aware of time. I feel like I could obviously talk to you much longer, but I'm aware of the time, and I again just really appreciate going in directions I didn't even know we were going to go today, and that's kind of the fun of it and the spontaneity of having this type of conversation. So I appreciate you. I'm going to do my quick fire questions if that's
Okay,
okay.
sure.
Yeah. And so there's 9 of them. Um, and just whatever word comes to you, a word or 2 words. And some of them are quite easy, and some of them you might want to think about for a moment, but whatever comes first. And the first question is, what makes your spirit expand?
Oh, nature.
Mm. And what makes your spirit contract?
Mm. Disrespect.
Mm. What is the next destination or experience that's on your bucket list?
That's not one word.
It's okay.
I'm in the process of moving back to the tiny little town I grew up in, and it is teaching me about tribe
Mm.
and teaching me about the fundamental beauty of conservative values. Yeah, I'm really grateful for that. Very
Mm.
excited about it. Yeah.
And what do you collect that says the most about you?
Animals.
Fun. How many animals do you have?
Right now, two.
Like,
I have a little dog who's my constant companion and a cat who keeps my wilderness cabin free of rodents.
which emotion has been your biggest teacher?
Hmm. Grief.
Mm. What do you wish you could learn?
Humility.
Mm. And what do you wish you could unlearn?
Arrogance.
And if you could meet your soul before you were born, what would it whisper to you?
It still is.
Yeah.
It's whispering.
Hmm.
Not what it whispers, it's that it whispers.
Okay, great. And if you could meet your future self 10 years from now, would it thank you for?
Coming home.
Mm. And thank you, Karen. I, again, really appreciate you um, and allowing me to navigate this conversation and being so vulnerable and open with me. I really just want to bow to you and everything you've shared here today. Thank you so much.
Well, that's mutual. Thank you for everything that you're carrying and holding and the beautiful light in your heart that keeps you moving forward and engaged with the world and serving others in such a beautiful way. Thank you, Holly. I'm really grateful you're my friend.
Ditto, ditto.